Welcome to Firewatch Live. I'm Tom DeSorcy, and I'm excited to have Scott Metzler here with us today. With over 30 years in emergency services and a background in public administration, literature, and philosophy, Scott brings a unique approach to tackling tough leadership challenges. This is the first of 10 sessions where we'll be talking about what makes a great leader. Today, we're going to focus on the human side of leadership. Leadership is about more than just managing schedules and tasks. It's about connecting with people, understanding them, and helping them grow. We'll talk about why it's so important to keep people at the center of leadership, even when things get busy, and they often do. Scott, it's a pleasure. Welcome.
Tom, thanks for having me. I sure appreciate this time to have a chat with you about leadership.
I think, and I guess we talk a bit off air, so to speak, about you and your background, and it's very interesting in the very beginning to find out about people, and we talk about your background. And I mean, I'm a fire person, but I've got a lot of stuff in behind me. And again, you've come from a fire background, so maybe a little biography before we get right into it.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, so I spent 30 years in the American Fire Service in the state of Kansas, so right in the middle of the U.S. Had a fantastic career, was able to sort of rise up through the ranks in my home department and spend time as the fire chief. And, really, leadership was an important part of my experience. But the last probably third of my career, I really developed a passion for sort of helping emerging leaders develop and find their voice and build those skill sets that help them succeed into the future. So that's where my heart is helping young folks develop leadership skills. I retired in 2019, and my encore career, what I do for a living now is I work as a leadership coach. I work to help folks and organizations develop leadership capacity and really navigate change. So that's where I'm spending my time these days.
When we talk about leadership being human work, I mean, I almost think that's the pinnacle of it all, but maybe that's the cornerstone, as it were, is what we're going to talk about over this series, and explain that a little bit more in terms of how it has to be human work.
You bet. Yeah. So, the human connection is, I think, the thing that separates management from leadership. And so we manage things, we manage programs and objectives, but the work of leadership really centers on people. And often the busier we get, the more focused we get on technical problems and technical solutions, the easier I think it is to lose sight of the fact that people are more than their roles, people are more than their responsibilities. And when we lose sight of this sort of human focus, we lose the ability to do really excellent transformational leadership.
People at the forefront, but when you say that we get tied up with tasks and we kind of forget that, is it easy to not pay attention to that human element and simply, I guess, go the path of least resistance and just think that you're leading this group of people?
Right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Tom. So, when we focus on the technical and lose sight of the human, we lose the ability to really do the heart and the gut work that's necessary for really good leadership. So I like to say that leadership, especially transformational leadership, is about deeply knowing people past their role, past their responsibilities. And yeah, it can be really easy to lose sight of that.
Do people have to, as you say, we talk about the busy schedules and just trying to think we are leading a group of people. You have to work at this, or do you? Is this something that can be, I want to say, I guess, muscle memory, as it were?
Right. Yeah, it's leadership is deep work, especially when we're doing the heart work and the gut work and deeply knowing folks. And so I know it can be really seductive and really popular to try to sort of boil down and reduce leadership to a pithy sentence or two to try to motivate folks. But really, you have to be in it, and you have to get your hands dirty, and you have to journey with people through really difficult developmental events if you're going to see people through and really exercise great leadership.
I want to ask for some examples or some kind of, I guess, sample sketches, if you will, of how to be that human being, if you will, to be connected with people as a leader.
Right, right. Well, yeah, I thought I might share sort of a foundational story of my own. And so when I entered the American Fire Service, gosh, 35, 36 years ago now, leadership was very much top down. Leadership was very much unilateral. Leadership was very directive. And that worked really well in the context of crisis. But outside of crisis leadership, that kind of approach didn't work so well. And at least my experience was the fire service was a little bit slow to catch on to that. So I learned to exercise leadership in that same way. And it wasn't until, maybe in the last half of my career, maybe the last third of my career, that I really understood this human element of leadership. And so a couple of things happened about the time I entered into an administrative role in our organization. So we had been exercising leadership. We had been getting by the same way we'd been exercising leadership and getting by for the last 100 or so years. And one day we woke up to find that about 65% of our employees in our organization were under the age of 30. And so obviously that didn't happen overnight, but that was sort of a jarring realization for us. And so with these younger generational cohorts entering the workforce, they brought with them different values, a different relationship to work, a different relationship to leadership. And so the things we'd been doing for so long stopped working. So we had to really take a step back and reimagine leadership for our people. At about the same time, we realized our community needs had changed. And so people were, again, this didn't happen overnight, but people were dialing 911, so our emergency access number, less for structure fires and more for emergency medical events. And our realization was not all of those events were emergencies and not all of those events were medical. And so we were increasingly being pulled into intervene in areas of social need, economic need, and we found that our tools, the way we were trained and equipped to solve problems didn't match up with the problems very well. So we had to take again a step back and reimagine, what does community service look like, and how do we retool this emergency services organization to be relevant in a community in which emergency services is less and less a part of what people call on us to do. So this whole idea of top-down unilateral decision-making, telling and expecting people to follow orders was out of alignment with our current workforce and their needs. So we had to really reevaluate, reimagine, and almost reinvent leadership.
That's an interesting point, and I often talk about that in the fire service from where I come from most recently, in terms of dealing with volunteers, dealing with people that want to get involved in our business, and the generation issue. And I've always used the term generational change, and that being the fact that people come and go and ages change and younger people come in. But I've never thought about the actual focusing on leadership when it comes to that audience. That's very interesting. Are you obviously finding that it's a different, I guess, is it reception to leadership from that generation?
Right. So our experience was, and the data suggests that it's very common that the younger the person in the workforce today, the more they value things differently than generational cohorts of my generation and older. And so things like fairness are very important. Things like early opportunity to make a difference. Things like authentic relationship with people. Those have always been important in the workplace, but largely they're deal breakers today. So if our young folks show up and find that the values of our organization don't match up with the values they hold dear, they're not very shy about telling us, and often they vote with their feet. And so we see increased turnover, we see difficulty in recruitment and retention. And so just paying attention to those things on a really sort of visceral human level was quite different for us. And we had to train ourselves to do it that way.
It remarkable then to mention that, because I'm trying to think back to when that change occurred, and I don't know that I physically or purposefully made the change, recognizing that it was just sort of developed. Did you have that kind of experience over your time? Did you have to realize, or when did you realize that this is different? This generation, this group of people that I'm leading requires a little bit different style?
Right, right. So for us, and again, none of this happened overnight, but we were really good at ignoring the clues because we didn't like what we saw. So this was sort of a slow shift, but about the time I became responsible for recruitment and retention in our organization, and so running the hiring process and making sure that new folks had what they needed to succeed in our organization. That was about the time that we started to experience people with 1 or 2 or 3 years experience in the industry or with our organization leaving for other jobs, often not fire service jobs. And that was new to us. That was brand new behavior in about 2009, 2010. So, our past experience was like most other fire service organizations. When we hired folks, it was for the long haul. They were here for 20 or 30 or 40 years. Whether we wanted them that long or not, they were hanging around. And so we had to really ask some tough questions about why all of a sudden these new behaviors are showing up. And so, our first response was to do what a lot of people do, and that was to become frustrated and indignant and start saying things like, well, they just don't build rookies like they used to back in our day. And there was a little bit of truth to that, but it wasn't all bad, right? So these new younger workers were bringing values to our department that we really needed to pay attention to and learn how to navigate better. So for all intents and purposes, our younger workers were bringing us a wake-up call to what leadership really needs to be about. And what we learned was it needs to be about investing in people. It needs to be about helping others succeed. It needs to be about sort of this selfless capacity to serve the needs of other people.
What is the difference? You mentioned recruitment and retention, and there is a difference in leading that group of people in either of those categories. And, the retention part means, hey, being a good leader, you're going to stay on board and want to be part of our team. But how does that differ from the actual recruitment process when you're bringing people along and trying, I guess, to demonstrate them being part of an organization that is led well? Is that there's
Right.
obviously a difference.
Yeah, I think there is a difference. The two are certainly related. What we discovered was the way we told our story wasn't necessarily the whole truth. And so, it's hard to change things for which you're not willing to tell the truth. And so when we marketed and advertised for open positions and recruited young members into the fire service, we did what a lot of people in this industry do, and that is to share pictures and videos of sort of the exciting, heroic red lights and sirens type of work that the fire service is known for. when in reality, that's a very small percentage of what it is we actually do. And so I would hesitate to call it a bait and switch, but so in some respects, we were advertising for a job that we really didn't have. And so we had to tell the truth about what it is we do. And what it is we do is serve the needs of our community, no matter what those needs are, even when they're not exciting, even when they're not, what it is we thought we signed up to do. And so, that was a huge shift for us in how we recruited people. And it also sort of informed how we retained people. And so one thing we learned about the younger generational cohorts entering the fire service of the time, and I think it's true even today, is that these folks want to make a difference. They want to join our organizations because there is a value proposition for them. So they don't want to wait around 5 or 10 or 15 years before they're able to make meaningful contributions. And sometimes those meaningful contributions look like leadership behaviors. And if you have sort of this old top-down leadership hierarchy, oftentimes those behaviors from new people aren't encouraged. Often they're discouraged and punished. And so we had to sort of reevaluate how it was that we allowed people to make meaningful contributions and exercise leadership behaviors for the requisite, maybe decades of experience.
What's the difference, or I guess recommendation for those that are, well, let's say leading over a long period of time and having been the leader for so long, I guess seeing the new recruits come in and being with them for the journey, as compared to, say, the transitional leader that comes into an already established organization? Is there advice that should be taken from this?
Yeah, I think there is. And so, one of the personal lessons I had to learn was this idea that leadership, when it's done well, perhaps when it's done best, is divorced from personal ego. And so it's easy to fall into the trap that in thinking the higher I advance on the sort of the corporate ladder or the organizational hierarchy, the easier it should be for me to do my job because I've earned that. The truth is, leadership is an invitation to do more work and not less, and that people should listen to me or follow me simply because I've been here a long time. And so, I don't want to denigrate the value of years of experience, but there's more to leadership than having been here a long time. And so, finding the needs of the people who look to you for leadership, finding the doors of opportunity for their growth and for their success, and holding those doors open while helping them prepare to move through those doors. Those are leadership behaviors that we should recognize and that we should reward.
I like your comment, reading that it's tempting to focus on things at the expense of people, especially when we're busy and we perceive that the stakes are very high. And that's a very important thing. And the word important comes to mind because you're not that important, I guess, is my thought.
Right. So, another lesson that I learned kind of the hard way through this sort of eye-opening exploration of, what should leadership be, what could leadership be, is this idea that leaders are a part of a dynamic system. And if the system isn't right, and by system, I mean environment and culture, not just the structural system, if the system isn't right, the leadership's going to fall flat. And so there's this sort of symbiotic relationship between leaders, collaborators, co-leaders, and followers. It's really important to sort of understand.
What are the risks in dealing with people at this level and the human work? And is there a risk of getting too involved, so to speak, if that's the right term?
Right. I think there probably is. So certainly, I do believe leadership is about deep knowing, and deeply knowing people past their role, past their technical expertise. But certainly, good boundaries are necessary for this kind of work. And so there's a limit to how emotionally involved it's appropriate to get with people in the workplace. So those boundaries should be uh, explicit, spoken about, followed, and respected. But at the same time, um, I really think, and I say this at some risk, because not everyone is on board like I'm on board, but I'm convinced that there's an element of love in really good leadership. And so one of the things that I have experienced to be true is that good leadership happens when people love who they work with, they love who they work for, and they love the work they do. When those three things come together, that's a pretty powerful combination. And that's when really good leadership can happen. And I should probably take an opportunity here to talk about this idea that leadership doesn't depend on rank. Leadership doesn't depend on promotions. Anybody can do leadership. Anybody can exercise leadership at any time from any position, as long as the system permits it. So, talking about getting the environment right, getting the culture right for leadership to be allowed to bubble up, even from those folks who don't necessarily have shiny things on their collars, or formal titles that go along with that leadership.
Does it make a difference? I mean, I know, I think I know the answer to this. Does it make that, what is the difference, I guess, is the question, when it comes to the volunteer ranks versus, say, a career department, where you're dealing with that style of leadership? Is it interchangeable, dealing with the human side, or should it be?
Yeah, so I think it is. And so, since leaving the fire service a few years ago, a lot of my work is in the private sector, nonprofits, different, places that are less hierarchical than the fire service, either volunteer or career. And what I've found to be true is that leadership is leadership is leadership, just like people are people are people. And so these ideas around leadership are equally applicable in the volunteer fire service, as the career fire service, as in banking, as in any other workplace. We've all been doing leadership for a long, long time. Leadership at home, leadership at church, leadership at Little League baseball practice, and this idea of focusing deeply on the human connection, I think, is the thing that sort of transcends all of those boundaries.
People are leaders, and I imagine they don't even know it, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, one of the sort of, I don't know, most powerful and maybe less understood or less appreciated leadership behaviors is the willing to see change, the need for change, the possibility of change, even if the change is just to make things a little bit better tomorrow than they were today. So if someone recognizes that need and is willing to step into the gap and help make things better for other people, and that's the secret. So, it's easy to make things better for me. Sometimes it requires a sacrifice for me to make things better for other people. But when you're willing to do that, that's leadership. We should recognize that behavior. We should reward that behavior. That's where the magic happens.
So recognition seems to be the key.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that is just really has been surprising to me, as I have sort of traveled the country helping people get better at leadership, is how secretive we tend to be about talking about leadership. And so sometimes the most powerful thing I can do for a group who's interested in developing leadership capacity is open a safe place to have the conversation. Because for some reason, for a lot of reasons, people are really reticent to talk about leadership. There's almost this idea that, well, you should just know that. We shouldn't have to teach you. There shouldn't be any question. And if you don't know it already, well, then, maybe you're not the right person. Maybe you're not really a leader. And I can't think of another place where helping people grow and helping people learn makes sense when we do it like that. And so sort of, this idea of demystifying what leadership is and how we do it is a really powerful conversation to have.
We talked and touched on the generations, and I know over time we will talk more, but it just come to me, and the idea of the generations we bring into the fire service, for example, today, the next generation, are they more acceptable to change versus what we are used to dealing with?
That's been my experience. And again, I think there's data out there that tells us the younger the person in the workforce today, not only are they more accepting of change, but they're almost demanding of change. So the younger the person in the workforce, when they see things that don't work, when they see organizational injustice, when they see things that are just kind of wonky, it's almost that they demand those things change, and they want to be a part of that change. And so the trick for leaders who are kind of, gray in the beard and long in the tooth like me is to figure out how to let them.
You have to adjust, is what you're saying.
100%. Yep. Yeah. There are so many types of leadership, approaches to leadership, and expectations people bring to the workplace of what good leadership is, that if we only know one way, we're going to get it wrong more times than we get it right. So leadership is absolutely adaptive. Leadership is absolutely situational. And, it is my life's work to figure out how to do leadership better and to help other people figure out how to do leadership better.
What's the measuring stick? How does the good leader know that they are the good leader?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And I think the measure is the success of the people who look to you for leadership. And so again, coming from a long history in the fire service, we tended to measure things that were easy to measure. Not that they weren't important, but we measured things like response times and call volume because they're easy to count. It's really a different question and a different approach to measure the success of the people who look to you for leadership. That takes heart work, that takes gut work, that takes deep knowing and deep conversation. Because out of 100 people in the workforce, my sense is that each of them are going to have a different threshold of success. Success is going to look different to each of those 100 people. And the best leaders are the ones who help the most people find those measures of success that they hold personally valuable.
Do people being led know they're being led? Should they?
Well, that's a really good question. And, I said a few minutes ago, there are lots of ways to exercise leadership. And so crisis leadership is a situation in which people need to understand that someone is in control, someone is making decisions, and someone has a plan for making this better. Other kinds of leadership, when things aren't on fire, when buildings aren't burning down, often require distributed leadership. And so getting the culture and the environment right so that everyone has a chance to sort of pitch in and exercise leadership where they can, where it's appropriate. And so in those situations, so I'm not talking about emergency or crisis incidents, but in those situations where it's appropriate for everyone to lead, it's almost as if the leader-follower distinction starts to dissolve a little bit. And so certainly as a fire chief, I found myself in situations where people who didn't have formal authority, didn't have a lot of time in grade or experience on the job were more skilled to solve the challenge that we were faced with than I was, or anybody on the senior leadership team. And so in those situations, my job, the leadership move, was to get out of the way and figure out how to support those folks. So I consider that a leadership behavior. My hope is that in those times, people didn't feel like they were being led or manipulated, but they felt like they were being supported to do the things they knew how to do. And so I think that the answer is yes and no.
I think we'll leave it at that for this round. Thank you, Scott.
Tom,
That
thank
is
you, Bill. What a great conversation.
that's all for our today's session and Firewatch Live. Again, thanks, Scott, for joining us and sharing your experiences. We hope you've gained some valuable insights into why the human element is so essential in leadership. In our next session, we'll explore how anyone, no matter their position, can be a leader. We'll talk about how small actions can make a big impact in any environment. I hope that you will join us for that. Bye-bye.